The Debt Management Office announced Nigeria's fresh borrowing in Q1 2024 at 7.71 trillion, including 2.81 trillion from new domestic borrowing and 4.90 trillion naira from securitization of ways and means advances. The total public debt rose to 121.67 trillion naira, up from 97.34 trillion naira in the fourth quarter of 2023, due to fresh borrowing and a 32.39% naira devaluation. The exchange rate shifted from 899.39 naira to a dollar to 1,330.26 naira to a dollar, causing a 16 trillion naira increase in debt value. And we now have joining us virtually a financial expert from Lagos, Mukhtar Mohammed, to give perspectives on the developments. Good morning, Mr. Mukhtar, and welcome to Daybreak. So, Nigeria's rising public debt. First of all, 121 trillion naira, and 16 trillion naira out of this figure is as a result of Nigeria's exchange rate. Just walk us through, what's going on in your mind right now as a result of that.
Well, what's going on in my mind is how did we get to where we are today? If you look at, like you rightly said, I think one single policy has driven us to where we are today, and that is the exchange rate. And it was a decision that was taken hastily by the present administration without looking at the corresponding effect it will have in the economy. So I think that is one what I'm looking at. But again, debt in itself is not bad. But again, if you are not able to pay some of this debt, that's where the issue really comes to play. So the good thing about this public debt, and what is hiking this public debt is actually the foreign debt, like you say, because of the current exchange rate. Remember, debts that were collected at an exchange rate about 400 are now doing at an exchange rate about 1,500. So you could see the over 200% hike in those debt payments. So it's a big issue. Fortunately, this government have really tried to see how they can handle that. If you look at currently, they said we are paying 35% debt, in terms of 35% of our budgetary allocation is for debt servicing. But the other 65% virtually goes to recurrent expenditure and others. So we really doesn't have so much to do with for capital projects. And so that's why you see that the government is still borrowing when it comes to capital projects. Comparable to the last administration, you know that their own debt servicing was as high as 98%. So they had to borrow massively, and that is why we struggle to.
Unfortunately, we've begun to encounter some network challenges. Mukhtar, can you hear me? Okay, we'll go on a quick break now as we attempt to reconnect with Mukhtar. Stay with us.
Hello and welcome to Africa Update. Africa contributes very little to the climate change problem, but Africa is the one most affected.
Climate injustice.
The African Union, for example, came together to put forth the Agenda 2063.
And the story of the OAU can be told and retold.
Ethiopia is where it is today because of the tireless efforts of the African Union.
The bulk of African countries were under colonial rule in 1945.
So, welcome back. We've now reconnected with Mukhtar Mohammed, an economist joining us from Lagos. Yes, Mr. Mukhtar, we lost you for a moment there while you were putting together your thoughts. However, you mentioned that one particular policy took us down this road. But the question some are asking is, could the government have done it better? You know, in the previous segment of the Daybreak Interactive, we spoke about the rising cost of accessing health care in Nigeria, which of course in one way or the other has been occasioned either by the rise, in the denomination between the dollar and the naira, to in some areas the exit of multinational pharmaceutical companies that left Nigeria due to what some would call the harsh economic climate. So what do you think the government would have done better to at least assuage some of these pressures that Nigerians have been facing since that particular policy, was removed?
Yeah, I think what the government would have done better was to look at if they have the war chest, which I normally call it the war chest, that is the liquidity, because you don't leave your currency to market forces to begin to determine prices of your currency or exchange rate of your currency. And that's what really happened. Market forces took advantage because government was not even able to meet legitimate demands. Remember, at that time also we have airlines, funds that were trapped in Nigeria. So government did not look at it holistically. They did not have the liquidity in terms of being able to intervene in the market. When you devalue, you must make sure that you devalue to the true state value of your naira. This is the first devaluation that we've done in this country, whether they call it floating, but it's still devaluation that was determined by market forces. And when market forces determine the value of your currency, they would definitely want to take advantage of it. So that is what happened. Second thing, what they would have done differently was in December, when the exchange rate was about 979. The CBN moved it to meet up with the parallel market rate that was at about 1,500. For me, that single decision has brought the naira to its knee. So those are the two major key decisions that were taken that I think has really affected the currency. And well, you said it already. Your guest in the morning talked about the removal of subsidy also has an effect on some of these issues that we are dealing with. But in terms of what we are talking now, in terms of the debt profile, what have raised the debt profile to where it is now, I think the single policy of evaluation of the currency without having adequate liquidity to also make sure that your currency is not battered.
All right, so let me just read this again. The Debt Management Office announced Nigeria's fresh borrowing in first quarter of 2024 at 7.71 trillion in just the first quarter, including 2.8 trillion from new domestic borrowing and 4.9 trillion from securitization of ways and means advances. But then again, you would ask yourself, I thought the Minister of Finance said they were no longer taking any advances from the ways and means.
Well, when you talk about securitization of the ways and means, I think it's not it is trying to talk about the previous administration, the ways and means, so they won't be able to pay it, so they try to securitize it, whereby it now becomes like a security, whereby they will have a lot of time to begin to pay it off to the Central Bank of Nigeria. I think that's what they did. It's not that they've gone back to the CBN to collect more in terms of ways and means, but they are trying to pay off the backlog of what they collected and the previous administration collected. And you know that the ways and means is also still involved in a lot of controversy. Was it 33 trillion? Was it 7 trillion? The House of Representatives, that is supposed to be the voice of the people, and the Senate were supposed to expose some of these numbers and give us the real numbers. And up till now, despite the setting of their committees, and they've been silent about it. So there's a lot of lack of clarity on what the true value of the ways and means, because when the CBN is saying it's about 7 trillion, what we have some other people saying is about 33 trillion. So there's still a lot to be done, and through the securitization of it, I think more details will continue to emerge. And when you secure it, now becomes like a debt that you have to pay through your security. So over time, they'll be able to pay it off. I think that why you have the one I'm concerned about, the new borrowing. When you look at some of those new borrowings, they are almost foreign borrowing. It's not been most of the local borrowing, because you look at the 2.23 billion from the World Bank. You also look at the Emzin Bank on money that was given to us, about 3.something billion to stabilize the exchange rate. So all those are what is akin to the new borrowing that we are seeing in terms of 2.something trillion, because all these numbers keeps changing as the days go by. The unstable nature of the exchange rate.
Mukhtar, now, while the federal government struggles to stabilize the naira and also stabilize the economy, the subnationals, of course, would be expected to, in one way or the other, try to ramp up their internally generated revenue to generate more money for the state. Unfortunately, we are not seeing that happen because a majority of states in Nigeria still go cap in hand to the federal government, for all sorts of bailouts to pay salaries for projects and the likes of that. This doesn't change the fact that some of these states also have, their own internal debt as well. Now, if we consider all of this and add up the fact that Nigerians are currently facing these harsh economic realities, and the organized labor, has been very, very vocal about the need to increase the minimum wage to a new figure, for Nigerians. Do you see this adding more pressures, to what the federal government is currently facing? And how do you foresee all of this turning out? Federal government has so many challenges to face on its own front, the state government also, and it's all looking like Nigerians at the end of the day will continue to bear the brunt of all of this.
I think the government needs to be strategic. I went through what the president is saying today on the papers about 1 billion will be released. I don't think that's the solution to our problem. We are doing same of same, thinking we get a different result. The solution to our problems is to really look at it critically and come up with a solution rather than all this try and error fire brigade method. You're talking about wrapping agricultural production. You're talking about bringing in about 2,000 tractors every year for the next 5 years. You are not strategic in what you're just saying some of these things, and you're saying, oh, we are talking to them. You have all these policy statements are also doesn't give investors confidence to want to come check that you make some statements and then the next thing you are changing the statement. So for me, that's the biggest challenge.
Okay, so I think we are still having another challenge with connecting with Mukhtar there due to the network connectivity, and we'll go on another break as we try to reconnect with him. Stay with us.
Hello and
Are you interested in the latest news and developments in Nigerian politics, policy, governance, and other critical national issues? Look no further than Daily Politics on Trust TV. Our panel of experts and key people in government provide in-depth analysis and commentary on the biggest stories in Nigerian politics.
And 33.3 million Nigerians are suffering from multi-dimensional.
Welcome back, and I believe we now have Mukhtar Mohammed back on the line. Mukhtar, thank you so much for staying with us. Unfortunately, the network has been quite a nightmare this morning. So, however, you were talking about the government strategy and what it needs to do, to ensure that Nigerians get some sort of a relief from some of these pressures.
I think the first thing the government need to do, I keep saying it, despite coming up with all this 1 billion household agriculture, 50,000 to some household in the next 3 months, assorted foods to household. They have to go back to what the tax reform committee is telling them. You just need to tackle those issues first and foremost. And what are those issues? Are the tariff on some of these goods that normally should many households in Nigerians are really using, because when you allow the exchange rate today is 1.5, tomorrow is 1.4, when these goods comes into the country, the price are very high, and so the ordinary citizens are not able to buy those goods, and that also affect the companies that are involved. So what I say that what the tax committee say, government, the true value of your currency, fix it and say this is the exchange rate for importation of goods into Nigeria is about 800, or is it 1,000 to the exchange, rather than today's autonomous exchange market, whereby you see today is 1,500, tomorrow is 1,400. They will pass the buck to the consumer, because 80% of what we consume, we normally import it. And in the next 5 years, you cannot drastically reduce importation. because we are talking about cash crops. Most of these cash crops take up to 2 or 3 years before you begin to enjoy the benefit of it. So the government should begin to think of taking a bite of their revenue. This is not rocket science. It has been done in other countries like Kenya. Kenya did it, reduced tariff, or at a point, zero tariff in any household item to come into the country, and that has brought their inflation drastically down. So all this challenge that the government is trying to put 1 billion here, that and that, I think it's just because they've refused to really take a bite of their revenue. They want to continue to have the same revenue. And if you're saying you have revenue for capital project, when the people are hungry, they will in turn destroy those capital projects. And that's what you are seeing when we see the destruction of some of these capital projects, like what we are seeing in the second Niger bridge, and people stealing the street lights in Lagos on the third mainland bridge. It's all because government itself is not ready to do the right thing, because people are hungry, so they are not looking at the good road network you are giving to them. They are hungry, they need food. And so government should think inwardly to begin to think of how they can address this issue than throwing money at the problem. Because what they are doing is the same thing we did during COVID. You and I know how it ended up. Most of these goods were left in warehouse. It has to take Nigeria trying to loot this warehouse for some of these goods to come. So nothing has changed. It's not that you have more data. Who is going to get the 50,000? Before you know it, it will be politically hijacked by politicians of the ruling party, of strong politicians, to begin to campaign for the next election. So I think government should begin to think innovatively, rather than doing same thing all over, thinking they will get a different result.
Well, you spoke about the government throwing monies at his problem, and you also spoke about the situation in Kenya. Of course, we know that protests are still on due to an attempt to increase tax in the country. However, complete removal on tariffs for items that have been identified as household items. He said it was able to drag down inflation, considerably. Well, I've heard some postulations here in Nigeria of some experts calling for similar implementations to also ensure the same thing, because like they say, if one's stomach is empty, then there's literally nothing you want to talk about, because he has to focus on feeding himself first than any other thing. However, would you advise the government to, carry out similar shots or similar imperatives that were taken in Kenya here in Nigeria, such as the removal of those tariffs from these household items to drive down inflation? And how workable do you think that they are?
Definitely, I support it. And if you look at the report from the Tax Reform Committee headed by Taiwo Yulede, he said the same thing, that they should remove tariff from some of these items. He's not saying total removal of tariff like his own report. He's saying that the exchange rate should be fixed. What it means, it should be fixed. It means that instead of having 1,400 today, 1,500, let it be fixed at a certain amount. That will drive down inflation, because that will bring down the cost of those goods. He is not talking about total removal of tariff, but I am advocating for total removal of tariff for household items, at least for the next 6 months. Instead of doing all these 50,000 that you're doing for household for 3 months, why not take a bite of your revenue in the other side and just remove this tariff and make sure that we have enough food? They will begin to build towards having wrapping up our production also. It's whenever you are thinking of producing, you're already talking to people that will come and export it to their own country for you to run FS. You have not even feed yourself. I think this government is one of the government that I've seen that come up with policy. They come up with the policy first, they say it, and then they go back and say, so how are we going to implement it? It's all about trial and error. And when a country is in a tier economic situation, you don't do trial and error. You don't panic, because what we've seen that this administration will keep panicking when there is the people are shouting, then they panic because it seems they don't really know what they are doing.
Mukhtar, don't you think all of this would now be in a sharp contrast to some of the government's policy? For example, the cash transfer program. I know we've not heard anything about the National Social Register, but this is going to be in sharp comparison, saying they should remove tariffs and also focus on feeding Nigerians more than sending Nigerians money.
But when you talk about removal of tariff, remember that it's not that government is going to pay anybody any money. they are going to remove tariff, and that also will bring down the cost of goods. So for the only place that government is going to suffer is that the revenue will come down a bit, because most of the revenue they earn from Nigerian Port Authority and others will have to come down. So what I'm saying, in the short term, you could suffer that challenge. Remember that the government have made so much revenue in terms of what they have made when these goods came into the country. So government need to look at that. But again, like you said, they must have a very strong compliant officers to really know that some of these items that are free from tariff are those items that are free from tariff. And so that again is having a structural structure on ground. Because when you talk about paying 50,000 to households in the next 3 months, who are these households? Who are the poor Nigerians? Where are they located? In some relatively expensive estates, you still have Nigerians that are also poor Nigerians living in those areas, maybe in the BQ, maybe having 1 or 2 things, they are working there. So what do you say? So you not distribute to them because you think they are rich. So we need to look at that, what they are trying to say. They have to look at it critically to come up with a very good working process.
All right, indeed. But then again, yesterday, the National Assembly, both the upper and the lower chamber, passed for second and third reading an act to, extend the implementation of the 2023 Appropriation Act and the 2023 Supplementary Appropriation Act from June 30th till the 31st of December 2024. It's looking like Nigeria is going to be having 3 budgets running concurrently for 2024. What are your thoughts?
I've told you that the government, it seems to be very, very confused. And like the minority leader of the House said yesterday, he said that this happened during the PDP administration, and a lot of people complain about it, that it seems to lack focus, and it's re-happening again. Remember that we've tried to make sure that we have a budget year of January to December. So what we are seeing, that we are now going to go back, we may not have those budget years any longer again. So I think, like I said, this government seems to be coming up with so much, and then I'm a bit confused when you have 3 budgets running concurrently when you cannot even successfully implement 1 budget. So are we now having budget for capital expenditure? And remember, again, we'll still be sending the supplementary budget to the House, and that supplementary budget is meant to cover minimum wage. We are trying to fight inflation. The government is trying to pump about 50,000 naira into the economy. That means liquidity will be high. That means what is happening, that the CBN in their next monetary policy meeting will be telling us that because of the inflow of liquidity into the market, they may have to hike rates. And when you hike rate, who suffers? Small businesses continue to suffer. So what you think you gain in one hand, you lose in the other hand. So the government need to really get their act together economically, come up with blueprint, come up with roadmap. Let us know, not just saying. They need to be strategic in their thinking. And when you are coming up with a policy, you are saying on the 20th of this, you will see this, you see that, you see that. Now, like you say, you are saying you want to pay 50,000. You are saying you want to support the economy 1 billion. You are not telling the governors to go back and come up with a roadmap to you. You say it doesn't add up. That means it's just a fire brigade.
It's just a fire brigade approach indeed. Well, unfortunately, was unable to land on his thoughts there. However, thank you so much, Mukhtar, for the perspective, thoughts, and comments on the developments, especially as it relates to Nigeria's rising debt profile, the state of Nigeria's economy, the state of the nation, and also looking for way forward to all of these challenges that Nigerians have continued to contend with. Thank you so much for joining Daybreak this morning. And now we'll go on.
Thank you for having me.
Break. And when we return, we'll be serving you the newspaper headlines. Stay with us.